In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Veni Sancte Spiritus repele tuorum corda fidelium et tui amoris in eis signum accende, emite spiritum tuum et creabuntur. Oremus Deus qui corda fidelium Sancti Spiritus illustratione docoisti, de nobis in eodem spiritu recta sapere et de eius semper consolatione gaudere, per Christum Dominum nostrum. Sede sapientiae. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. So we saw yesterday that Pope Leo X promulgated in June 1520 the bull condemning 41 propositions of Luther's teaching, threatening him with excommunication, and that the propositions that were condemned in globo, as it's called. Meaning that all of the propositions on that were condemned on this list of condemned propositions were all listed and then were condemned as heretical or false, scandalous, offensive to pious ears, insulting, ensnaring, and contrary to Catholic truth. So, in other words, all of them received one or another of those censures. The papal sentence did not proceed against Luther's person with the severity which, in accordance with canon law, his fiercest adversaries perhaps anticipated. Because obviously he's saying many things that are, some of which at least are heretical or false, or scandalous, etc. You heard the list of all of the theological censures. So his fiercest adversaries in Rome, those who were working to see him condemned, or at least his doctrines condemned, thought that he would have been treated with more severity, but apparently not. But again, we've seen already from other instances to what extent Pope Leo X was very much inclined to be rather forgiving, perhaps more forgiving than you would expect, or that we would even say someone should be under the circumstances. Yes? In globo, it means it's all of, I explained it, that all of the condemned propositions were listed, and then the censure is given after that. So in other words, he didn't say, condemned proposition number 31 is heretical, condemned proposition number 32 is offensive to pious ears, 34 is scandalous. He didn't do that. He just gave all of the condemned propositions and then all of the censures that they get, not necessarily specifying which one. And that's reflected, so sometimes you'll see theologians citing something, a papal document condemning errors, and they'll say, these authors will say, it's at least whatever is the lowest of those censures. It's at least this level, and this one captious, seductive of simple minds. That because this, whatever one proposition he's talking about, is on a condemned list, the lowest censure given for which is captious, seductive of simple minds, then that's the least that we can say about this proposition, is that it's seductive of simple minds. But didn't say just very least by the exact words of the document, and you can figure out, depending on what is contrary to a defined dogma, what is contrary to a truth taught by the Universal Ordinary Magisterium, etc. You can figure out, so some of them anyway, to some extent, which propositions deserve which censures, but not exactly from the words of the document. So that's in globo. Is anybody else not clear on that? Even the errors mentioned as occurring in his writings were designated only in the body of the bull, and with much circumlocution. So it was a very wordy document that condemned these propositions. And the only direct penalty imposed on him in the meantime was the prohibition to preach. So he's saying all those things, and don't get up into the pulpit for the moment. That's all he's got at the moment, and he's got worse coming towards him. He's got worse penalties coming his way, but for the moment, all of those propositions condemned, and the worst penalty he gets is don't preach right now. The bull declares that legally, as his case then stood, he might have been excommunicated without further question, particularly on account of his appeal to a general council, to which the constitutions of Pius II and Julius II attached the penalties of heresy. He says the penalties of heresy, because as we've seen, heresy is a crime, not only against the civil, but not only against the ecclesiastical, but also against the civil orders, and to all of the penalties that you would get for appealing to, just saying something heretical, you also get for appealing to general council, again, above the Pope. Instead of this, he, meaning Luther, is for the present merely threatened with excommunication and is placed under the obligation within 60 days, that is, after a triple summons repeated at intervals of 20 days, from the date of the promulgation of the bull, of making his submission in writing before ecclesiastical witnesses, or of coming to Rome under the safe conduct guaranteed by the bull. He was also to commit his books to the flames. In default of this, so in other words, if he to not conform to the requirements of the bull, he would be, by virtue of the papal declaration ipso facto, he would incur the penalties of open heresy as a notorious heretic, meaning he would be cut off from the communion of the faithful by excommunication. Every secular authority, including the emperor, was bound, in accordance with the law, to enforce these penalties. A similar sentence was pronounced against all of Luther's followers, aiders, or abettors. So he's not the only object of this either. Anybody who would dare to help him is also subject to these penalties, to this excommunication. Yes?
Father, to what city was he given the safe conduct?
To Rome. So he was able to go to the Pope himself to make sure he gets a fair trial. But again, if he were to not do this, then he would be excommunicated. So the document begins with the words of Scripture, "Arise, O God, judge thine own cause." So, Exsurge Domine, et judica causam tuam. Remember thy reproaches with which the foolish man hath reproached to thee all the day. And then that's from the Psalms. And then also quoted in the document, the words from the Canticle of Canticles, "Show me thy face, catch us the little foxes that destroy the vines." So, essentially calling Luther a mischievous fox in a vineyard. Or applying those words of Scripture to him, which of course is entirely fitting. And then also from the Psalms, "The boar out of the wood hath laid it waste, and a singular wild beast hath devoured it." Of course, that's a very fitting image of the havoc that heresy has the potential to wreak within the church, within nations of people who are largely Catholics. And then other things, "Lying teachers have arisen who set up schools of perdition and bring upon themselves speedy destruction. Their tongue is a fire full of the poison of death. They spit out the poison of serpents, and when they see themselves vanquished, they raise calumnies. We are determined to resist this pestilence and this eating canker. The noxious adder must no longer be permitted to harm the vineyard of the Lord." So this is how a pope deals with heretics. Even a pope who's not particularly inclined to being harsh. This is what a pope who truly intends to provide for the common good of the church says about heretics, and what he threatens against heretics. Again, we're talking here Pope Leo X. He's definitely not the hardest pope, the strongest, the toughest, you might even say, pope to ever live. But he said these things. about Luther. Further on, the Pope addresses, as is more characteristic of him, in a mildly fatherly and conciliatory fashion, the instigator of the schism within Christendom, which was up until that time fairly well united. He says, "Mindful of the compassion of God, who desireth not the death of a sinner, but that he be converted and live, we are ready to forget the injury done to us and to the Holy See. We have decided to exercise the greatest possible indulgence, and, so far as in our power lies, to seek to induce the sinner to enter into himself, and to renounce the errors we have enumerated, so that we may see him return to the bosom of the Church, and receive him with kindness, like the prodigal son in the Gospel. We therefore exhort him and his followers, through the love and mercy of our God, and the precious blood of our Lord Jesus Christ, by which the human race was redeemed, and the Church founded, and adjure them that they cease from their troubling with their deadly errors the peace, unity, and the truth of the Church, for which the Savior prayed so fervently to his Father. They will then, if they prove obedient, find us full of a fatherly love, and be received with open arms." So, at the end, that's Pope Leo X, what he would be willing to do if Luther and his followers were to come to their senses. Of course, we keep talking about how Leo X is not the harshest personality who ever lived, but any pope would say the same thing to a heretic or group of heretics, would promise to do to them if they were to return to their senses. Would, of course, receive them back into the church. In the case of clergy, not always allowing them to exercise their orders, but would still, of course, no pope would refuse to reconcile to truly repentant heretics. But again, the emphasis being on that, truly repentant. He would, of course, require that Luther renounce all of his heresies. He condemned in the bull his own propositions as the church condemns them. And this is actually interesting. Sometimes you'll see heretics, you'll see it in the history of the church, heretics will say, "Oh yes, absolutely," or followers of heretics, "Yeah, oh, yes, we absolutely condemn these condemned propositions, but that's not what we say. That's not what our leader says." That's another typical thing, which is false, because the church has infallibility with regard to what's called dogmatic facts. And one of those things is that essentially when the church says these errors are condemned and they're in this document, they're in these writings, that they actually are in those writings. So you can't get around a condemnation and thereby effectively continue adhering to your heresy by saying, "Oh, that's not our heresy." Essentially, that loophole does not exist. So if you ever read about that, like with regard to Jansenists, that was a typical example. Was Jansenists would say, "Oh yes, we adhere to the teachings of the church, and we condemn these heresies as they're condemned by the church." But Jansenius doesn't say those things, which is false. The church understood correctly what he said and condemned what he said, and required his followers to renounce those errors themselves. But of course, Jansenius is in the future still. But it's an interesting point. I couldn't let that go. So, Luther was then well aware that after the promulgation of the bull, he could place no further hope in the Emperor Charles V, whose devotion to the church was well known, but he was sure of the protection of his elector. That's what he's banking on right now. It was interesting that Emperor Charles V, another important character, he had two sons who were also very famous. Two I'm thinking of in particular right now. Does anybody know who they were? The ones I'm thinking of in particular right now. I'd have to count exactly how many sons he had, but there are two. King Philip II of Spain and Don Juan of Austria. Don Juan of Austria was actually his illegitimate son, but Philip II of Spain was, of course, very famous king of Spain. He reigned during the time of Saint Teresa of Avila, and Don Juan of Austria was the leader of the Catholic fleet at the Battle of Lepanto. Again, that's decades in the future still, that battle. But you already see that the man whose son would lead the Catholics in that battle is already reigning as Holy Roman Emperor and also King of Spain. So his two sons, I'll just write that down for you because it's just important to know. And that's, of course, they very much figure in ecclesiastical history, but it's more secular history. But Charles V, Emperor Charles V, his two sons, or two of them, I have to see exactly how many children he had, but Philip II, and also, again, Don Juan of Austria. And also because the royal family was apparently allowed to sit in the sanctuary, Don Juan of Austria was not allowed to because he was not legitimate. So he had to sit in the pews. Poor fellow. But he was illegitimate, so he wasn't allowed in. Alright, so it was clear to Luther that without the support of the elector, the execution of the bull by the secular power after the excommunication had come into force would mean his death. Because, obviously, we see just how disruptive he's being to ecclesiastical authority, how defiant he's being. There's absolutely no reason he would stop with the civil authority. But at the same time, yes, he needs to keep the protection of his elector, this prince, to see to it that he doesn't burn at the stake for his heresies, being punished by the civil authority for his offenses. But then our author says before publicly burning his boats, we would probably say burning all bridges, before, in a sense, declaring total war on the church. Of course, he's already effectively at war, but we're not quite in total war territory yet. They're still trying to reel him back in. It's not, as we see, we will see it's not successful. He doesn't end up coming to his senses. But before that point, even so, he launched among the people a new booklet pretending that the bull, which he knew to be genuine, how could it not be? It was public, very prominent document, was merely a fabrication of Dr. X. So he just made that up. He lost the debate, and therefore he's making it look like the Pope's going to excommunicate me. No, it's real. Nobody can debate that. And in this booklet, with a bold front, he repeated that his doctrine had not yet been condemned, nor the controversy decided, and that all of the hubbub was merely the result of Eck's personal hatred. Of course, it's not to say that Eck wasn't actively trying to bring about the condemnation of his doctrines, but for one thing, that's deserved, as it wasn't just out of personal hatred. We don't know. I'm not entering into the mind of Johann Eck here, but certainly the condemnation of Luther's doctrines was something that needed to be done. We can just pay attention to the words of the document, the papal document, putting down his ultimatum to Luther. We see in the Pope's own mind, from his quotations of Scripture, just how urgent it was that these things be condemned. So it's not just anybody's personal hatred. It's a matter of defending the faith against an extremely bold heretic. That pamphlet was followed shortly after by another pamphlet against the Bull of End Christ, he called it, apparently referring to the Pope. Yes. Well, again, I'm extrapolating from that, but clearly, he portrayed himself as having won. Yes. Again, there's a lot of things in these biographies of Luther that we're skipping over. Else, a lot of them have to do with stories that he made up. Just because, if we see what's happened, we're looking at what actually happened, how these things actually panned out. If you ever get a heretic who says, Luther actually won that debate at Leipzig, you can point out, just from these authors, that absolutely not. According to in the minds of everybody there, he was destroyed. He and his debate partner were absolutely demolished. So, of course, by knowing what the actual facts of the matter are, you can fairly then easily answer essentially propaganda stories fabricated either by Luther himself or people who adhered to his doctrines in one form or another down the centuries. So again, he published this pamphlet against the Bull of Christ, presumably referring to the Pope. It was issued by his indefatigable press. So printing presses are working overtime, probably. The Latin version of this work, brimming over with hatred, was ready by the end of October 1520. Although, in order to keep up the pretense of doubting the authenticity of the bull, he here deals with it hypothetically. So he's saying, oh, this bull's fake, but if it were real, this is how I would argue against it. Essentially. And in this, he implores the Pope and his cardinals, should they really have issued it, to reflect. Otherwise, he would be forced to curse their abode as the dwelling place of Antichrist. Surely that made them shake in their boots. I'm sure they were scared of being cursed by some crazy heretic. In the same strain, he proceeds, Where art thou, good emperor, and you, Christian kings and princes? You took an oath of allegiance to Christ in baptism, and yet you endure these hellish voices of Antichrist. So, more blasphemy. More blasphemies against the church and the papacy. And then, of course, we see here trying to curry favor with the civil power in order to prevent himself from being executed after he refuses his ultimatum, refuses to conform to the bull that was laid out to him. Which, as we see, it's not like they said after this date you will be executed no matter what you do. Clearly, he's being given the opportunity to recant. But he's not going to do that, so he knows he's destined to be excommunicated and is going to, according to the normal order of things, then be executed by the civil power for being subversive to that order as well. So when he's trying to prevent that, he's currying favor now with the emperor and other civil rulers by telling them that the Pope is the Antichrist and I need you to defend me. I guess I'm the great prophet. I guess that's his idea. I need you to defend me against the evil Antichrist in the person of the Pope and his minions. And that's the imagery he's setting up here. That's the course he's pursuing. But again, as you would imagine, Charles V doesn't fall for that. But that's not to say that other civil rulers didn't go along with it for their own motives. Although apparently the German version, from motives of policy, the tone is rather milder. Perhaps he saw more danger of turning people off in Germany if he kept up the same tone in his German version of this pamphlet. He shrank from instigating the German princes too openly to violent measures. As then it would be very easy to say he's just a revolutionary, which he is. It's just that it made his hand a little too obvious. The appeal to them and to the emperor is there omitted. So perhaps it was more of a rhetorical device in the Latin version, but we'll see in the future. He relies very much on the civil rulers in order to provide for his own personal safety against the penalties, which of course he deserves as an unrepentant heretic. But still, the call to the people rings loud and enthusiastic. Would it be a wonder if the princes, the nobility, and the laity were to knock the Pope, the bishops, parsons, and monks on the head, and to drive them out of the land? That's what he said. Oh, very peaceful fellow. For the action of Rome is heretical. The Pope, the bishops, the parsons, and the monks were bringing the laity about their ears by this blasphemous, insulting bull. Amazing he has the audacity to refer to the bull as being blasphemous when he employs himself so much blasphemy in attacking it. Then he suddenly pulls himself up, but to very little purpose, and adds, Not that I wish to incite the laity against the clergy, but rather that we should pray to God that he may turn aside his wrath from them and set them free from the evil spirit that has possessed them. Because clearly that's what he meant by hitting them over the head and sending them away. Ridiculous. But yeah, we'll see, he's not beyond contradicting himself in the same document. That's not outside the realm of possibility for him. So in the German version, he refers more distinctly to the existence of the bulls against Dr. Luther, which are said to have recently come from Rome. So yeah, he's still not admitting the authenticity of this document, of this bull against him, if Exsurge Domine. He's still not acknowledging it, but he's still protesting against it. So he's protesting against something that's non-existent and urging the Pope to disown something which he never sent out. Yeah, if you can figure it out, let me know. He here declares, as to the theological question involved, that as a matter of fact, the whole Christian church cannot err, namely, all Christians throughout the whole world, but that the Pope is guilty of the most devilish presumption in setting up his own opinion as though it were as good as that of the whole church. So if this sounds a little bit like SSPX, you're onto something. Yes. Sure, from where? The most shocking, the whole thing? He says, let me see. So in this bull he declared, or in this pamphlet, as to the theological question involved, that as a matter of fact, the whole Christian church cannot err. So like SSPX, he's essentially transferring infallibility from the hierarchy to the learning faithful, from the Ecclesia Docens, the teaching church, to the Ecclesia Decens. Meaning all Christians throughout the whole world, confirming our understanding of what he's saying, but that the Pope is guilty of the most devilish presumption in setting up his own opinion as though it were as good as that of the whole church. So, yes, that's SSPX before they were fashionable. Of course, they would disown Martin Luther, absolutely, but you can't deny the fact that there are parallels here. I mean, that's practically what they say, that Vatican II is evil, but it's not binding. What it actually is, they never quite say. Presumably just the private opinions of, yes, a misguided pope and a few evil minions, or perhaps his evil entourage, whatever they say. Although they probably wouldn't say that Bergoglio was just a result of manipulation by an evil entourage. But maybe it's just, yes, his own most devilish presumption in setting up his own opinion. So, no, I mean, it's the parallels with SSPX are far too many here. So this work is leveled at the doctrine of papal infallibility, which had always been accepted in the Church in cases where the Pope decides on matters of doctrine as the supreme judge. This doctrine had ever been taken for granted and stood in the forefront in all the measures previously taken by the Church against the attacks of heretics. Even in those days, the Church had always based her action against the separatists on her infallibility as a teacher. Of course, the final definition of papal infallibility would not take place for another few centuries. It's actually till 350 years later, during the First Vatican Council, of course, really the only one, which, in point of fact, is technically still on, because Pius IX never actually brought it to a final close. He prorogued it, he put it on hold almost, because of the outbreak of the Franco-Prussian War, and it was never reconvened. So technically, it's still on. It's been going now since 1870, technically. So maybe the next pope can finish it. And the first thing to do is condemn all the heresies of the council that supposedly finished it. But it's interesting that originally the definition of papal infallibility was actually not on the agenda of that council. And the reason that it was done is because all the liberals were saying, oh, this is terrible, they're going to define papal infallibility. So they said, that's a good idea, let's do it. Essentially, that's how it came about. So they did. So, careful if you're not that I think anybody's a liberal here, but if you know any, caution them to be careful of what they complain about, because it might end up backfiring. Okay, so in view of the existing political conditions, there was but little hope that it would be possible for the General Council, to which Luther had appealed, to meet at an early date. Of course, a true General Council operates on the authority of the Pope. So Luther's hope of appealing to one properly so-called is false anyway, although we'll see he has other ideas about what a General Council means. But even that looks impractical at this point. So at the time of his uprising, the state of feeling, both in ecclesiastical circles and among the laity, gave little promise of good results, even in the event of the calling together of a great council. Of course, our author here is referring to real, true councils, but if you've studied any of the previous eras of church history, you'll see just how many problems arise from councils, even local councils. Once these groups of bishops came together, and you'd think that they would take the opportunity to always, strengthen the faith in people, but many times they would end up, especially these local councils, they would always end up coming up with something heretical. And it was very easy for various heretics to manipulate these gatherings of bishops, and they're bishops. It's supposed to be the backbone of the church, and then they always end up coming up with something bad. It's perhaps because of so many instances of that Saint John Chrysostom says that the floor of hell is lined with the skulls of bishops. And as a Bishop Sanborn is one who always points that out whenever we come across that in previous years. So we take that from a bishop, that bishops can be problematic. Or also just think about it, at Vatican II, how did everybody go along with that? Why are there so few names that we know now, or recognizable names of people who didn't go along with it? So, the stormy so-called reforming councils of the 15th century, of course we can talk about other even before then, of course long before then, many centuries earlier, had shown the dangers of the prevailing spirit of independence, and the feeling among the ecclesiastical authorities was, from motives of caution, which, if you've studied those previous years, you'll see that those motives were definitely well-founded, were adverse to the holding of councils. Luther, on his part, was well aware how futile was his appeal to a general council. So here we're talking about real general councils, a council called by the Pope. He was probably hoping for something like the Council of Basel, which would maybe start out as a real council called by a real Pope, and proceeding according to all of the normal methods of a council, all of the sessions of a council, but then eventually breaking off into its own schismatic gathering, which eventually peters out. Perhaps he was hoping for that, but there's so many problems of that, such a history of problems arising from these councils that, of course, Pope Leo X, for one thing, he's not going to call a council because a heretic wants it, and then even so, the general feeling was against it because they probably knew their history. That his request was useless and intended only to gain time was apparent to all who had any discernment whatsoever. So anybody who had basically a head on his shoulders and two eyes to see what was going on around him. When on November 17th, 1520, he again appealed to a free Christian council. So now it seems, that sounds anyway, like something apart from the Pope. And he's deciding on but basically bringing together all of his own people and calling it a council. That's what it sounds like. Luther's appeal was published at the same time as his Latin work against the Bull of Excommunication. So he's calling for a council, but at the same time denouncing the Pope again. Its character is plain from its invitation to the people to oppose the mad action of the Pope. It was a method of agitation calculated to call forth the applause of those who had become accustomed to the ecclesiastical radicalism of the so-called reforming councils. So again, we saw previous councils like the Council of Basel, supposedly reforming, but breaking off and becoming its own schismatic thing. He was probably hoping for something like that, but people have learned. People are becoming a little more attuned to things, realizing that councils are very much prone to problems. So he's really doing all this, and Luther's aware that this is feeling. Most likely he's aware of all that. So he's doing it just to essentially get publicity, increase his following, and just generally buy time. So he gave a practical effect to his view regarding the value to be set on solemn papal decrees on faith by his famous act before the Elster Gate of Wittenberg. On December 10th, he there proceeded to burn the Bull of Excommunication amid the acclamations of his followers among the students, whom he had invited to the spectacle by a public notice exhibited at the university. So not only the bull was committed to the flames, but according to the program, so what he put out advertising this, also books of the papal constitutions and of scholastic theology. And I found some more quotes from this is from Father Grisar, the author we've been following for most of this biography of Luther that we're going through right now. But Deras gave some other quotes, which I worked into the document. I'll give it to you in study guides. I don't have it right here right now, but essentially he says that it was after that things entered into the realm of total war. There was no hope of bringing Luther back after that. Of course, had he actually converted, had he actually repented, he would have been received back into the church, but given a heavy penance, no doubt, public penance. But at the same time, humanly speaking, there was no hope that he was going to amend after that. So while in the act of burning the bull, he pronounced the words, "Because thou hast destroyed the truth of the Lord consume thee in this fire." And that is a reference to the book of Joshua, apparently. So he's twisting sacred scripture again. Yes. 1520. So in June, the first the bull that was promulgated condemning his doctrines, it was promulgated on June 15th, and then on December 10th, he burns the bull. So it was so again, we have this anniversary, 500-year anniversary of this in a couple of months. Again, I don't suggest celebrating it. Yes. He burned the Bull of Excommunication on that date. Yes. December 10th, 1520. So that was effectively his final breaking off of all diplomatic relations and even the chance of diplomatic relations after that. So a few weeks later, he related, and yes, you had a question? It's actually, they're not entirely clear, but in any case, he burned a papal document that had to do with his excommunication. It seems, again, they gave him 60 days. December 10th is more than 60 days after June 15th. So it's probably the same document, because again, it said that he would be automatically excommunicated if he were to not comply, and he did not comply. So he was excommunicated. So it may have he was probably already excommunicated at that point. It's just this was the final break. This was the most decisive act he made to really say, I am now fully in revolt against the church. So most likely, again, they're not very clear, so they don't mention it being a separate document, so it was probably the same one. If I find out otherwise, I'll let you know, though. So he related a few weeks later, not without pride, how the students in the carnival days made the Pope figure in the show, the students being dressed up to play the part, seated on a car with great pomp. At the stream in the marketplace, they allowed him to escape with his cardinals, bishops, and attendants. He was then chased through various parts of the city. Everything was well and grandly planned. For the enemy of Christ is deserving of such mockery. since he himself mocks at the greatest princes and even Christ himself. The verses which describe the whole scene are now being printed. So essentially making mockery of the Pope, mockery of course, not only he, but also not only of the Pope himself, but also of his cardinals and bishops, just generally showing his contempt for the whole ecclesiastical order. So evil things were okay. So of course we have to go on now to the section on the diet of worms, which again that's the name of a city. That's not that's not referring to an actual dietary plan. Don't anybody get that idea? All right. So we'll move on. That's our next section here. But he's still subject to a summons to go there. Because Pope Leo X, in a new bull, Decet Romanum Pontificem, so it behooves the Roman Pontiff, again, I have to look at the rest of the document to find out what exactly comes after that, but the title being Decet Romanum Pontificem, January 3rd, 1521, had declared that Luther, owing to his present contumacy, had ipso facto incurred excommunication and become liable to the penalties already decreed by law against heretics. So it was that document that says that the sentence has actually taken place. So again, this is Decet Romanum Pontificem. And this is January 3rd. (1521). Maybe that's something we can celebrate in January. January 3rd of next year, 500 years since the excommunication of Martin Luther, or at least the final declaration of it. He may have already been required to observe the sentence even before then. But now all of Germany is being flooded with Luther's writings with bewildering rapidity, our author says. So he's really really making use of the art of printing discovered by Gutenberg. He commenced printing the booklet to the Christian nobility before it was fully written, and its plan he settled while a second pamphlet of his against Prierias was passing through the press. So he's really pumping out literature here in favor of his heresy. And of course, in his own personal defense. This, in turn, was accompanied by a booklet against the Franciscan Alveld. So he's not particularly famous, but probably there's nobody he didn't like against whom he was unwilling to publish a pamphlet. Between the publications of the three so-called Great Reformation works, which with the new editions immediately called for, followed one another in rapid succession, came the printing of a sermon on the New Testament as well as some theological tracts. At the same time, he published some religious works of a practical nature, so how to practice heresy in the practical order. That's not the actual title. A book of consolation for suffering and perturbed Christians, probably according to the methods he used for himself. And then also, perhaps somewhat surprisingly, the commencement of a commentary, an exposition of the Magnificat. Just remember that people are attracted to heresy because of the little bits of truth that are in there. So perhaps, and from what I've heard, his commentary on the Magnificat is actually nice. So you can figure that out. Let me know, because that's interesting. Yes?
Just a curious question. In all of his heresies, did he say anything against our faith?
Again, it would seem that he had a certain, perhaps, of course, a true devotion to Our Lady is only to be found in the Catholic faith and in union with the Church and in submission to the Roman Pontiff. But he may have had a certain like sentimental attachment to those devotions. So I've not read all of his writings, so I can't say whether or not he ever attacked Catholic doctrine on Our Lady. But it would seem that it would not be his first target if he's writing a commentary on the Magnificat. It would seem. And well, even this, he dedicated to Johann Friedrich, the Elector's nephew. So even that he makes use of to further his own cause. Like, I haven't read it myself. I don't know if there actually is any heresy in it or not. It was very much of practical use for him in increasing the esteem in which he was held at court. So essentially for him, why waste an opportunity to flatter somebody who can protect you? That's how he thinks. But again, for somebody who's writing a work supposedly for suffering and perturbed Christians, of course he meaning his own followers, but that's what he wrote it for. His own perturbation, which had become to him almost just an element of life, served to dispel his fears and doubts. So he likes this conflict because it distracts him from his own problems. He says, "I am battling with the floods and am carried away by them. The noise of strife rages mightily. Both sides are putting their heart into it." So he's enjoying all this conflict. And of course, our author says that Catholics discern with grief in this uncanny joy a sad attempt on his part to find encouragement in the preposterous notion he fostered of the devilishness of the papacy. So he's trying to distract away from his own scruples and fears, and one of those ways by doing is essentially by setting up this boogeyman, this false idea of the papacy that he's attacking, and sees that as that's the object of his anger and of all his anxiety, not his own problems. They will also perceive in his outbursts of rage and in the challenges to violence in which he indulges in unguarded moments the effect of the excommunication working on a mind already stirred to its innermost depths. So he appears to still be bothered by this fact that he was excommunicated for what he sees as the true gospel that apparently nobody was able to discover for a millennium and a half until he came along and had his supposed moment of personal inspiration, the Tower experience. That's how he's thinking of this. So again, it bothers him that he was excommunicated. So when we hear him declare in a popular pamphlet after the arrival of the papal bull that it would not be surprising were the princes, the nobility, and the laity, I think we saw this, that they hit the pope, the bishops, priests, and monks over the head and drive them out of the land, we find that such language agrees only too well with his furious words in his tract written in 1520 against Prierias, where he compares the pope and his followers to a band of cutthroats. So again, we're seeing his tactic of if you don't like someone, attack him, or just throw whatever insults you can think of at him. So he argues that if murderers are punished with the sword, why should we not proceed with still greater severity against those teachers of perdition who are determined not to repent? Why do we not attack them with every weapon that comes to our hand, and wash our hands in their blood, if we thereby save ourselves and ours from the most dangerous of flames? So that's his argument for why you should go around persecuting Catholics, because they're evil. They contradict me, therefore they're evil. Right. So, and on that comforting imagery and edifying passage, we'll pause for the day. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, Amen. Subitum praesidium confugimus Sancta Dei Genitrix, nostras deprecationes et despicias in necessitatibus, sera periculis cunctis libera nos semper Virgo gloriosa et benedicta. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, Amen.